Yeah, and even before we get to Super Tuesday, Austin, if we could pull up the South Carolina polling. So on Saturday, we have South Carolina's primary. And the state of the race right now, I mean, we have Sanders has been trending upward, and this is sort of the quote-unquote Biden wall is really South Carolina, given the nature of the demographic composition of the electorate among Democratic primary voters in South Carolina. This should really be a place that plays to Biden's favor. However, we've sort of seen a drop in his poll numbers, and Sanders keeps doing pretty well. Now, in South Carolina, we're going to have the oddity of another case where we're going to be paying attention to Steyer's numbers pretty closely, as he could potentially play the role of a spoiler for, I guess, really for either of the top two candidates beyond that. However, in previous years, we've really looked at South Carolina as a predictor, or as just determining some sort of the electoral strategy leading into Super Tuesday. But Drew, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, there's just not enough time to pull any conclusions out of South Carolina going into Super Tuesday.
Right. I mean, we're going to know the the South Carolina results 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, somewhere in there, Saturday night. You have Sunday and Monday before you hit the Super Tuesday. Now, you also have to remember, a lot of these states are already voting. And,
right. Especially California, where the big delegate haul is. Yeah.
Texas has early voting. North Carolina. Minnesota has been voting for a month at this point. So yeah, a lot of this is kind of baked in. So you look at that idea of having another moment. It might fall somewhere between the Klobuchar effect and the Warren effect, where Klobuchar benefited because New Hampshire's a non-early voting state. Warren got little to no bump out of it because of all the votes that were already in the bank. So I find it very hard that somehow this is going to alter the course of the event on Super Tuesday. But, we've seen it before. But even you look at New Hampshire, that was Friday night, didn't have voting until Tuesday. So you had an extra day and a half of it to sink in. But yeah, it's the early voting that's really going to lock a lot of this in. We're also in a different area than New Hampshire, where this is where Bloomberg, what happens here. He's had the field to himself mostly in terms of spending, certainly. And everybody, while they talk about his spending, he also has a large ground staff. Now, does that translate? We don't know. But you look at the polling, at least, and it seems everybody's just clustering. Sanders sort of has what he's had all along, which is a bit of a lead in some of these states, and then everybody else is very close behind, or in states where he might not be leading, it's just very tight. And the question for me for South Carolina is, even if Biden wins, and even if there is time for a knock-on effect, how much is blunted? He was supposed to win this by 15, 20%. Pulls out to 3, 4, 5%. It's good, but better to win than not. But is it enough to say, okay, this is the guy, he's back on track? And I don't know. It feels like we're on rails, doesn't it? That, we know where we're going here.
Yeah, I think so. Scott, what do you think Biden needs to do in South Carolina for him to maybe, if there's even time, to translate that into something on Super Tuesday? What does he have to do in South Carolina this Saturday?
Win decisively.
What does that mean? What's like the number?
Beat Bernie by 10 points, which probably isn't going to happen. No one's betting on that one to happen. And if he does, even then, like Drew was saying, Texas and California, I don't know, 30, 40% of the people who are going to vote have already voted. And that's where the delegate rich stuff is coming in. And so, I can already feel it now. You're going to hear complaints from some of the Democratic Party about, we got to get rid of early voting because it doesn't allow the voters to really see what the candidates are doing. We've got to have full week separations between debates or contests and things like that.
I think it goes the other way. I think it goes more towards a national primary is
or
what
a
they'll
national
call
primary,
it.
something
Yeah.
where they, because like, look, everyone is going to look back on this, to Drew's point about Warren's good debate performance, but not translating. It's because of where we were in the vote and the early vote and all that kind of stuff. People had already made decisions. It's just funny to me. I think some of the Democrats are going to start sounding like Republicans in terms of what they think about early vote and what they think about some of these other things going on. At the end of the day, these are just the rules, but it is very not beneficial for whoever wins South Carolina, because if someone surprises in South Carolina, which I don't think they will, how do you even if you raise $10 million that night, you can't put it into all of the states and have any sort of effect between Saturday night and Tuesday. And even if you could snap your fingers midnight on Saturday after, if you're Biden and you're beating Bernie by 10 points, even if you could snap your fingers and employ 10 or $15 million, it doesn't matter. Does not matter. So much of the vote has already been cast, and you need several days to get the TV and digital into the stream. Now you get the earned media, you'll be able to pick up some votes on election day, but it'll be blunted a lot like Warren was in Nevada, despite her good debate performance.
This is somewhat predicated on the idea that Sanders, or the eventual Democratic nominee, loses in November. And I'm not projecting that or saying that, but I'm just saying this conversation. We may be seeing the last of the primary system, or not system, but schedule as we know it, because of the factors you're laying out. And everybody's always looking to fight the last war. But there's just been so many changes in terms of early voting, the nationalization of these. You used to have these debates, and they would focus, if you had a debate in Nevada, it focused at least significantly on Nevada issues or New Hampshire. And these are all now done by national outlets. They're all focused on national issues. It's just changed tremendously in the last 2 or 3 cycles about how this happens. And I think the calendar, because there's so much built up internal pressure and so many interests, is kind of going to be the last thing that changes. But it does become, it seems inevitable that there are going to be major changes to the calendar after this year. But you're also always fighting the last war. The issues we're seeing in these caucuses that are probably going to kill them is because of the Sanders campaign wanted some of these changes. They wanted early voting. They wanted more accessibility. They wanted these raw numbers to be put out. And that's put a tremendous strain on these state parties. So it's going to have a huge effect going forward on how primaries are conducted and run.
It's funny you bring up the raw numbers. I know we're in the wrong piece, but like the one thing that took me is, the Sanders campaign wanted all 3 numbers released, and I think that's great. But it's not like these caucuses ran so smoothly in 8 and 12 and 16. Like, these problems probably existed back then, but they were hidden by the fact that the state party could just come out and say whatever they wanted, and there wasn't enough public information so these campaigns could dissect it and Twitter could dissect it. And, it just makes you think, going back to 08 and going back to 16, maybe there was some truth to what Bernie was saying about Hillary in Iowa.
Well, the idea, the whole idea of why they wanted to release the numbers in the first place was the Sanders campaign internal numbers had indicated that he overwhelmingly won the popular vote in Iowa, the so-called popular vote on that first round. It just didn't translate into the delegates. So, from a strategic perspective, it seems like it was a smart idea to demonstrate how this so-called popular vote and the delegate math doesn't necessarily add up, because then you have a situation where, even though the Iowa result is still in flux, where you had Sanders on Iowa night at least come out as the leader on the first round, but then Mayor Pete swooping in with the delegate lead, although that has narrowed substantially sort of since then. But it seemed to me, that seemed like a strategic move to me from the Sanders campaign, learning from 2016. If their internal data was right on election night on that first round, then this seems like a smart move. And now there's a national conversation about whether or not we should be caring about these caucus numbers at all, because they're not exactly translating what the popular will of Democratic primary voters are.
But that's also happening even in the primary states, and it'll happen to Sanders' advantage if this keeps on track like this. He's not winning 50, 60, whatever percent of the popular vote, but he's going to get close to that in the delegates, because you have such a large field, and it's keeping people right around 15 plus, or maybe just below 15%. So having 30% or 35% of the vote means you a disproportionate amount of the delegates. So this is just the reality of how this is done, and people are paying more attention to it. And in the age of social media, there's more people dissecting this kind of thing. But politics is always about hypocrisy, right? You know, it's fine when it works for me, and it stinks when it works for you. But yeah, this is just the nature of the beast, and nothing has changed, and nothing will in terms of that. But we're just seeing it play out, and I really do think it's going to look very different next time, especially if Trump does win, and you have 2 open races in 2024. There's going to be a lot of jockeying about how the parties can reassert some control here over this process.
Yeah. Yeah, the calendar stuff, all of this, I'm sure we'll have a discussion in next week's or in coming weeks about what happens, I'm sure after Super Tuesday, but what happens if Bernie's got it but doesn't have the 1991 and where everyone else goes. But there isn't going to be anyone who's going to be happy. And having lived through the 2016 Republican presidential primary, there wasn't anyone who came, everyone was pissed on both sides. Even Trump's team was pissed about how they were treated. There's no way this is going to get easier as we go through. And it could get nastier. You got a lot of people. I mean, Bloomberg's got fuck you money. Bernie's got fuck you all, I'm never leaving support. Pete and Amy, they're staying on. The only one who looks pragmatic is Elizabeth Warren, who looks like she's auditioning for, Bernie's vice president with all of this stuff. So you've got a lot of personalities who can stick around, and they're gonna cause some issues.
And that goes to the idea about the changes in the system too. One of the reasons you can do this and have these fields be as large as they are, as long as they are, is fundraising. You can go out and you can get a dedicated army. You can raise $9 million after a good debate, and that buys you another couple of weeks. That's just not something that happened 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so people stick around and they have their own reasons, and it just becomes this feedback loop of extension, and nobody really being able to put somebody else away and become this clear winner. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of looking at this going forward.
Yeah.